Welcome back to Geographics. I'm your host, Cosmic Horror Madman Eric Malachite, and today we're talking about an event which took place just 1 hour and 36 minutes from the house I grew up in. Yeah, that's kind of terrifying in a way. Today's script was written by Ben Edelman, so be sure to show him some love in the comments and tell us, in your opinion, what the most dangerous bank robbery in the history of bank robberies is. Is it the one we're discussing today? Why? Why not? With that out of the way, let's get started. The city of Los Angeles is used to more than its fair share of outlandish stories. It's the home of Hollywood, after all. Entertainment that seems too wild to be real is routine business in the City of Angels. But in 1997, a plot that seemed ripped right off the pages of a film script became terrifyingly real when two bank robbers packing automatic weapons emerged from a North Hollywood bank and decided to shoot it out with the police. Most shootouts involving police officers are over in a matter of seconds. This one lasted a heart-stopping 45 minutes, as the robbers not only heavily outgunned the cops, but wore body armor that prevented the shots from police from having any effect. All the while, the drama was captured live on camera, the shocking pictures broadcast around the world. By the time the North Hollywood Shootout was over, 2 people were dead and over a dozen were wounded, and almost 2,000 rounds had been fired. One of the longest, bloodiest, and most impactful police shootings in American history. The gun battle was the catalyst for major changes in police department tactics and armaments all over the country. Changes that are still felt today, by the way, over 25 years later. It might sound like we're describing a movie to you, but remember, everything that we're about to tell you actually happened. Early in the morning on February 28, 1997, 2 men in a shared house in LA's Granada Hills neighborhood got up and got ready to go to work, just like millions of other people all across the city of Los Angeles. These were not your typical 9-to-5ers, though. They were bank robbers. And this morning, after months of preparation, they were preparing to make a very large withdrawal. Larry Phillips, a 26-year-old native Angelino, and Emil Matasareanu, a 30-year-old immigrant from Romania, had first met at a Gold's Gym and became fast friends, sharing an interest in bodybuilding and guns. The bigger, the better. Phillips had a long history of petty crimes, including shoplifting and real estate fraud, and at some point in the early 1990s, he convinced his best friend, Matasareanu, who had no prior criminal record, to become armed robbers. Between 1993 and 1996, the pair committed 4 robberies of armored cars and banks, stealing almost $2 million in cash. They'd also added murder to their rap sheet when they ambushed and shot a Brinks guard to death during a 1995 robbery in LA's Winnetka neighborhood. There are 2 different kinds of bank robbers: the quiet kind, who casually slip a threatening note to a teller demanding money, and the loud kind, who burst into the bank wearing ski masks and pointing guns at employees. Phillips and Matasareanu were decidedly in the second category, leading to the FBI, who assigns nicknames to unidentified serial bank robbers to dub the pair the high-incident bandits, which is honestly not that creative. Their target today was a branch of Bank of America located on busy Laurel Canyon Drive in North Hollywood. Based on their reconnaissance of the bank, they believed that the bank should have received a large shipment of cash from an armored car that morning, leading to another big score for them. Just after 9:15 a.m., they got out of their white 1987 Chevy Celebrity sedan, having set the watches sewn into their gloves for 8 minutes, which was their estimation of how long it would take for the LAPD to respond to the robbery. In this, however, they were so unlucky. A patrol car just happened to pass by the bank as the robbers were walking in, wearing ski masks and carrying rifles. The officers in the car called in a 211 in progress before the robbery had even started. In 1997, the LAPD was not the most popular group in the city, to say the least. The department had absorbed several body blows in the last few years, most significantly in 1991, when a group of officers was caught on film badly beating a man named Rodney King, which should be familiar to you, with their nightsticks during an arrest, footage of which shocked and horrified the country. When 4 officers were subsequently acquitted of assault charges at trial in 1992, it triggered 6 days of the most destructive rioting in U.S. history, leading to 63 deaths and more than 2,000 injuries. Longtime police chief Daryl Gates was widely blamed for the disorder and forced out of office. Then in 1995, former football player and actor O.J. Simpson was acquitted of the double murder of his ex-wife Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman. An acquittal that was largely blamed on the LAPD, who had bungled the investigation. Trust in the department, the third largest in the country behind those in New York and Chicago, was at an all-time low. But none of that mattered at this particular moment, as police responded to the bank robbery in progress in North Hollywood. Following standard procedure, responding officers positioned themselves on the four corners of the bank in order to prevent the suspects from escaping. They also heard shots coming from inside the bank. Phillips and Matasareanu fired their rifles into the ceiling in a successful effort to intimidate the bank staff and customers. At least some of the shots were caused by frustration. There was much less cash inside the bank's vault than the robbers were expecting, a result of the armored car company changing its delivery schedule. In the end, they bagged up just over $300,000 in cash, less than half the $750,000 they were hoping for. At some point, the robbers noticed that the police were waiting for them outside, but they appeared to be unconcerned. After locking everyone else in the bank inside the vault, the two men exited the bank and almost immediately opened fire on the officers behind them. Both Phillips and Matasareanu were carrying Norinco Type 56 rifles, a Chinese copy of the Soviet AK-47 assault rifle that had been illegally modified to fire automatically. Their guns could fire 10 rounds a second and were powerful enough to punch right through the police patrol cars and even body armor the officers were wearing. The North Hollywood Shootout had begun. At the time, the LAPD's patrol officers were equipped with 9mm Beretta handguns and 12-gauge pump-action shotguns, weapons that were judged to be sufficient for the vast majority of shootings the police were involved in, which occurred at close range and against opponents that were similarly armed. But the guns in the hands of these bank robbers were designed to be used on a battlefield, and could not only shoot faster but farther than anything the officers on scene had. Even when officers scored a hit on Phillips or Matasareanu, it appeared to have no effect. Both men were wearing customized body armor strong enough to stop pistol bullets and shotgun pellets. Only the SWAT team was equipped with more powerful weapons. They were on the way, but for now the officers at the scene were on their own. Within the first few minutes, 6 police officers were wounded by gunfire. Other officers bravely returned fire, but scoring a headshot from 200 feet away with a pistol is no easy feat, even when you aren't being shot at. Because the situation had developed so quickly, only 7 minutes had elapsed between the robbers entering the bank and the beginning of the shootout, there hadn't been time to clear the danger area of civilians, and there were dozens of them in the line of fire now as the robbers fired indiscriminately in all directions, including up in the air, scattering the 5 news helicopters and 2 police choppers, all jockeying for space trying to see the action below. News crews on the ground also found themselves in danger, including a reporter and cameraman for the Spanish-language TV station Telemundo that were forced to duck as bullets whistled over their heads. All of this footage was transmitted over the air live to the entire city, and the recordings would eventually appear on news programs across America and the world. The scene was pure chaos, as the exchange of gunfire echoed off the buildings, amplifying the sound, mixed in with frantic and overlapping radio calls from trapped and wounded police officers and the loud roar of multiple helicopters hovering overhead. One of the gunmen, Matasareanu, got into their getaway car and appeared to be urging Phillips to do the same. However, for some reason, the younger man did not do so, instead continuing to fire at anyone he saw. The Chevy celebrity started moving west away from the bank on Archwood Street, with Phillips walking alongside. In an ironic twist, they'd had to leave the money behind. In their haste, they hadn't noticed the dye packets inserted in the bag along with the money, which detonated, ruining the currency. Which is, karma. Now the only reward that they could obtain was to escape from the robbery with their lives and their freedom. All of northern Los Angeles was in chaos because of the gun battle. Burbank Airport rerouted its traffic away from the hot zone, 10 different schools were locked down, and the Hollywood freeway was shut down. Police officers were unable to rescue injured officers who were still in the line of fire because of the hail of bullets, eventually commandeering an armored car to drive into the battle and pick up the wounded. Realizing they were outgunned, a group of cops headed to a local gun store where they borrowed a number of AR-15 rifles in an attempt to even the odds. Meanwhile, a small army of officers from multiple jurisdictions cordoned off 10 city blocks, trying to prevent the bank robbers from escaping. But Phillips and Matasareanu didn't seem in a particular hurry to flee from the scene of the crime. Phillips had fired so many rounds from his Type 56 rifle that it was overheating. He swapped it for another of their arsenal of weaponry in the celebrity's trunk, an HK-91 semi-automatic rifle, a civilian variant of the German G3 military assault rifle. However, police fire damaged this weapon soon after he began using it, rendering it unusable. He dropped that one and pulled out a third weapon, another Norinco Type 56. He still refused to get into the car with Matasareanu, and at some point it appeared his partner gave up on him and started driving away. You know, as one does. Now on his own, Phillips continued to wage his one-man war against the LAPD. He had hand-sewn body armor that covered him from his neck to his ankles, rendering him virtually impervious to police bullets. Virtually. However, the sheer number of shots being thrown his way were finding the chinks in his armor, slowing him down. His firepower was also greatly diminished. The third rifle he was firing had a worn extractor mechanism and was prone to jamming. Eventually, he tossed it aside and drew his last resort weapon, a Beretta 9mm handgun, ironically the same weapon that the police were using against him. A police bullet struck Phillips in the hand, causing him to drop his pistol. When he picked it up, he must have realized that the game was up at this point. Phillips and Matasareanu had previously been arrested after being pulled over in 1993 with a truckload of weapons and explosives. They'd spent just over 3 months in jail after reaching a plea deal with prosecutors. After they were released, Phillips, according to his father, proclaimed that he would sooner die than go back to prison. Now he fulfilled that pledge, putting his pistol under his chin and firing one final time. Police rushed his body, handcuffing him even though he was obviously dead, which was procedure at the time. An autopsy would later determine that Phillips had been shot 11 times in the battle. At the same moment he committed self-deletion, a police bullet had struck him in the neck, severing his spine. Either that bullet or his own would have been fatal. Matasareanu continued to drive away from the gun battle. However, the Chevy Celebrity had been seriously damaged by police bullets, including having all 4 of its tires shot out. If he was going to get away, he needed a new getaway car. He fired his weapon through his windshield in an effort to get civilian cars coming the other direction, who had no idea what they were driving into, to abandon their vehicles. After a couple unsuccessful attempts, he got the driver of a 35-year-old Jeep pickup truck to jump out of the driver's cab and flee on foot. Matasareanu now began transferring weapons from the Chevy into the Jeep. He also switched weapons, swapping his Chinese rifle for a Bushmaster XM15, a civilian version of the American M4 military carbine. Like the Type 56s, this gun had been illegally modified to an automatic rifle. He could be seen limping at this point. He'd sustained a painful wound to his right buttock earlier in the battle. Unlike Phillips, Matasareanu did not have any body armor on his arms or legs, a decision that was about to come back to haunt him. Matasareanu got behind the wheel of the truck to resume his getaway. However, karmically, he was unable to get the vehicle to start. He had no way of knowing that as he left the truck, the driver had flipped a toggle switch under the dashboard that shut off the truck's fuel pump, a common feature on older vehicles that cut the fuel supply in case of an accident. Either Matasareanu had never driven one of these vehicles before, or in the rush of the moment he didn't think to check. Either way, he wasn't going anywhere. 3 SWAT officers in a patrol car now drove right up to the truck, not realizing their suspect was that close. They cut a bizarre figure, wearing running shorts and sneakers under their body armor, having been on a run when the call came in. But the AR-15s they carried were all business. Matasareanu bailed out of the truck and took cover behind the celebrity, waging a vicious close-quarters gun battle that lasted for over 2 minutes. The officers then began firing underneath the 3 vehicles, striking Matasareanu multiple times in his unprotected legs. Eventually, he threw down his weapon and gave up, having been shot a total of 29 times in the course of the battle. The officers cuffed him and called for an ambulance to take him to the hospital, but by the time it had arrived, Matasareanu had bled to death. The North Hollywood Shootout was over, having lasted for 44 minutes, a mind-boggling long time when you consider that most police shootings only last seconds. It is believed that nearly 1,800 rounds had been fired during the gun battle, 1,100 by Phillips and Matasareanu and 650 by police. There were hundreds of bullet holes all over the area. 2 officers suffered injuries that forced them to retire from the LAPD. With all the carnage, it is amazing that the only 2 fatalities on that day were Phillips and Matasareanu. too. The fact that everyone else recovered from their injuries is down to bravery on the part of the officers on the scene, as well as a healthy dose of luck. No one had ever seen anything like the North Hollywood Shootout before. The most accurate comparisons were fictional, particularly the 1995 film Heat, whose climactic scene features a group of heavily armed men robbing a bank and then engaging in a bloody shootout with the police. In fact, Heat was reported to be one of Larry Phillips's favorite movies. A VHS copy of it was found in a house the pair had occupied that was later raided by police. 18 officers were awarded the LAPD's Medal of Valor, the department's highest decoration for bravery. A group of them traveled to Washington, D.C., where they were feted by President Bill Clinton. They were also honored prior to the start of a Los Angeles Dodgers baseball game. In the immediate aftermath of the shootout, the LAPD received a much-needed popularity boost, as its officers were honored as heroes. It was a publicity reprieve that wasn't to last long, however. The immediate takeaway from the North Hollywood Shootout was that the LAPD's officers and police officers in America in general were unequipped to handle the kinds of threats posed by criminals armed with the military-style weapons and equipment that had begun flooding the firearms market in the 1990s. All across the country, there was a push to give police departments access to more powerful equipment, particularly surplus military equipment provided by the Department of Defense. The DoD gave the LAPD 600 surplus M16 rifles in the aftermath of the shootout. These were given to patrol sergeants. Today, most officers in departments all over the country have access to police tactical rifles, usually civilian copies of American military equipment. With the advent of the War on Terror in the 2000s, even more military equipment was transferred to police departments as part of the 1033 program, including assault rifles, body armor, and armored vehicles. As of 2022, more than 8,000 police departments across the country have received over $7 billion in military equipment. This program has attracted criticism from both sides of the political aisle, as concerns have been expressed about the growing militarization of police departments across the country. Some have questioned, for instance, whether a rural police department that sees little violent crime needs its own armored personnel carrier or SWAT team. Others question whether turning police into a paramilitary force is a good idea. After all, the job of a military is to destroy their country's enemies, while a police department serves its community by investigating and preventing crime. As for the LAPD, the good feelings toward the department in the aftermath of the shooting didn't last long. Less than 3 weeks after the North Hollywood Shootout, an LAPD officer named Kevin Gaines was shot to death by another officer in self-defense following a road rage incident. The investigation that followed would eventually uncover widespread corruption in the unit Gaines was a part of, Crash, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums, which focused on anti-gang activities. The resulting Rampart scandal would show a group of police officers acting like a gang themselves, engaging in robbery, drug dealing, and framing of suspects for crimes they committed themselves. 24 officers were eventually disciplined, and over 100 criminal convictions were overturned because of tainted evidence. To many, it seemed like the LAPD had lost control of its officers, with widespread allegations of racism, police brutality, and other forms of misconduct both inside and outside of Crash, which was disbanded. In 2000, the city of Los Angeles entered into a consent decree with the Department of Justice in order to institute reforms within the police department. The DOJ would oversee the LAPD until the decree was lifted in 2013. Today, the North Hollywood Shootout is remembered as one of the longest and most violent confrontations in modern police history. At the Los Angeles Police Museum in Highland Park, there is a prominent exhibit featuring artifacts from the shootout, including one of the shot-out police cars and the white Chevy Celebrity the robbers used, next to life-size mannequins of Phillips and Matasareanu dressed and equipped how they were the day of the gun battle. The shootout has also found its way into American pop culture, with many non-fictional portrayals in documentaries, as well as fictional homages such as one of the missions in the video game Grand Theft Auto V. In 2003, a made-for-TV movie about the shootout entitled 44 Minutes starring Michael Madsen premiered on the FX network. The strangest part of the whole affair was that Phillips and Matasareanu didn't really need the money that they were trying to rob from the Bank of America that day. When police raided their house, they found over $4,000 in cash from previous robberies that they hadn't spent. Whether it was pure greed or simply the love of the game that sent them to the bank on Laurel Canyon Boulevard that day, what resulted will live on in American history as a day that changed the LAPD and other police departments across America forever. I hope you learned something today, and if you dug this video, be sure to deploy your likes, tell us whether you'd like more videos like this one, and share this video with someone who loves true crime and videos about famous or infamous places. I'm Eric Malachite, and I'll see you next time, Space Cowboy.